The city at night stretched beneath the skyline like black velvet stitched with light. Glass towers rose into the mist, reflecting a world of luxury, shining, distant, and cold. At the top floor of one of them, where crystal chandeliers spilled gold onto marble, Julian Cross leaned back in an Italian leather chair, swirling a half-empty glass of whiskey. He wasn't tired, not physically, but there was always a certain exhaustion in his eyes, the kind born not of work, but of winning too much and feeling too little. Across from him, Max, his college roommate turned lifelong devil's advocate, was scrolling through his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. "Bet you can't undress her." Julian arched a brow, eyes still on the amber liquid. "Who?" Max turned the screen toward him, zooming in on a grainy security feed of a girl mopping near the executive elevator. "Lena Hart, night janitor. Rumor has it, she's never even kissed a guy." Julian glanced at the screen. The image was blurry, black and white. But the way she stood, it wasn't the posture of someone bowed by life. She walked like the world didn't get to tell her who she was. Max laughed again. "Actresses, models, heiresses, you've had them all. But her? No power, no ambition. Just skin and silence. Bet she won't even look at you twice." Julian should have laughed it off and walked away. But ego is a stubborn beast, and curiosity, a more dangerous one. "All right," he said slowly, downing the rest of his drink. "Let's see what a virgin janitor can do to a billionaire." Julian wasn't used to being ignored. So when Lena Hart stepped off the elevator for her night shift the next evening wearing loose gray scrubs, her hair tucked into a casual cap, and walked right past him like he was nothing more than a shadow on the wall, he knew this wasn't a game anymore. She wore no makeup, no trace of perfume trailing behind her, but her simplicity had a strange kind of power, a presence that didn't need to announce itself. She wasn't shy, she wasn't proud, she just worked like it was the most natural part of who she was. Julian leaned against the glass frame of his office door, hands in his pockets, trying to seem casual. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. She looked up, and her eyes met his, quiet, cool, but not cold. "I've had worse," she replied. "Julian," he offered, wearing his signature half-smile. "I work here too." "Figured," she said, eyes never leaving her mop. No gasp of recognition, no flicker of interest, no reaction. Either she didn't know him or didn't care. He watched her openly, unashamed. "What's your name?" A brief hesitation. Then she sighed. "Lena. Not gonna ask what I do? If it matters, I'll find out eventually." She said it without looking up. The calm in her tone made Julian feel like he was speaking to a book that hadn't yet been opened. No one had ever made him feel invisible before, and oddly, that made him want to be seen more than ever. "You always speak like you're testing people." Only when they ask questions like they already know the answers. Julian laughed, genuinely. For the first time in weeks, it wasn't polite or strategic. It was real. She made him feel lighter. He stepped forward. She immediately stopped mopping. Didn't turn, but he knew she felt him. "Relax," he said softly. "I'm just bored." "Then maybe go home," she replied, still not looking at him. "This floor's already clean." He should have walked away, but something inside him cracked instead. For the first time in years, a woman didn't care who he was, and that unfamiliar ache, the need to be seen, not admired, made him stay. Julian began staying later at the office, not for work, but for Lena. She arrived at the same time every night, like muscle memory, with her cart, gloves, and a silence that wrapped around her like invisible armor. He'd sit near the window, a mug of coffee in hand, pretending to read a file he hadn't touched. Sometimes he'd ask, "What kind of music do you like? Do you think everyone's lonely, even in a crowd? Does Seattle's constant rain make people forget the sun?" Lena rarely answered, but when she did, her words cut cleaner than any flirtation ever had. She wasn't seductive, She wasn't trying to be interesting, yet everything she said made Julian feel seen. Truly seen. He learned she was 23, working 2 jobs to pay off her mother's medical bills. She hadn't gone to college because survival didn't leave room for dreams. She read poetry, Neruda, Ryuki, but couldn't afford to buy books, so she borrowed them from the janitor closet. She also despised men in suits who wore them like armor. They only always want to own something, she once said, not looking at him. A girl's body, her story, her silence. Julian wanted to say, "I'm not like them," but he didn't. Because he had been. Maybe he still was. Until now. Each night she left, he felt stripped of arrogance, of certainty. There were no smirks left, no charm to fall back on, just a man sitting alone in a room that suddenly felt too large. He used to enjoy being pursued. Now he was the one waiting. For a glance, a short smile. But Lena didn't need him. Not for money, not for power. She looked at him like she could see straight through and was waiting to know if there was anything real beneath all the shine. Max kept asking, "So, did you do it yet? Or is the little janitor still untouched?" Julian just sipped his drink and didn't answer. Not because he couldn't, but because suddenly the question felt stupid. She wasn't a conquest. She was a mirror, and for the first time he dared to look. Everything changed on a Friday night when a system glitch triggered a temporary lockdown on the top floor. The lights flickered, the elevators froze, and in that silent space, there were only 2 people left, Julian and Lena. She stood in the hallway, gripping her mop handle like it might save her. "Looks like we're stuck," he said, his voice softer than usual. "The generator will kick in soon," she replied, trying to stay composed. "I know," he nodded gently, "but maybe the one who's afraid right now is me." She turned to him and truly looked, not at his tailored shirt or perfectly styled hair, but at his eyes, and the exhaustion inside them. Not from work, but from something that had weighed him down for years. "Why do you keep watching me like you're trying to find something?" she asked. "I'm just mopping a floor." "Because I made a mistake," he breathed out, like releasing a long-held burden. "It started as a dare, a stupid ego move, but then I saw you. And it wasn't a game anymore." He paused, voice catching. "I don't want to undress your body. I want to understand why you wear silence like a second skin." Lena stood still. No flinching, no fury, just silence. Thick, unflinching silence. Then she said, quiet but clear, "Most men try to touch my body. You try to touch my pain." He stepped closer. "Not enough to invade, just enough to be honest. Because I recognize it, I carry my own." In that dim hallway, something shifted. Julian wasn't a CEO anymore. Lena wasn't a janitor. They were just 2 people standing in a corridor, letting go of everything the world had forced them to be. That night, when Julian came back to her small apartment, not as a man of power, but as a man surrendering to what he felt, Lena didn't send him away. She looked at him quietly, as if finally allowing herself to believe. In a room barely large enough for a narrow bed and a borrowed bookshelf, she sat down, pulled a towel from her damp hair, and said, "You can leave now, or you can stay. But if you stay, stay because you see me. All of me." Julian knelt in front of her, hands resting gently on her knees. "Then let me be the man who stays." The days that followed passed like a dream that didn't need explaining. Julian stayed. No penthouse, no board meetings, no billion-dollar schedules. He slept on Lena's worn-out couch, though she knew he only pretended to sleep so she wouldn't feel like he was taking up her space. In the mornings, he made coffee without asking how she liked it, and somehow always got it right. In the evenings, they cooked together. Garlic-heavy pasta, grilled cheese with burnt edges, pancakes for dinner. Everything was a little messy, but honest enough to feel almost dangerous. One night, as she curled beside him on the couch, an old movie flickering on the TV in the background, she whispered, "I still don't understand. Why me?" He didn't turn, eyes still on the screen, but his hand tightened around hers. "Because you didn't ask for anything, but gave me everything. Because you didn't try to impress me, you undid me. Because when I was the most powerful man in the room, you made me feel small, and I liked it." She buried her face in his chest, her lips trembling, not from fear, but from something inside her heart finally unlocking. To Julian, this wasn't a challenge anymore. Lena wasn't someone to reach. She was where he wanted to rest, the question he wanted to spend a lifetime answering. But real life doesn't stand still. On a Thursday morning, Lena got a call from the cleaning agency. The woman on the line was cold and clipped. "There's talk of you and a client, a very wealthy one. We don't deal in scandal. You'll need to resign." No chance to explain. No one listened, just a sharp click and silence. That afternoon, Julian returned from a meeting and found Lena sitting on the bed, holding her folded uniform in her lap. Her eyes were red. "He fired me," she said softly. He froze, then stepped forward, kneeling in front of her, taking her hands. "Because of me?" She nodded. "They said I crossed a line. No, I pulled you into a world where rules don't apply. I should have shielded you from the fallout." She looked at him, her eyes wet but fierce. "Don't you dare apologize for loving me. Not if it's real." His breath caught. "It is. More than I know how to say." She pressed her forehead to his, whispering, "Then don't prove it with words. Prove it by not leaving when things get ugly." That night, Julian made his choice. Not out of guilt, not out of redemption, but because for the first time in his life, he wanted to love without hiding. He called the board. His voice was calm, steady. "I'll be stepping away from Ashcroft Industries, not retiring, just returning to something real." Max exploded. "You're giving up an empire for a janitor?" Julian didn't flinch. "Empires built on hollow men eventually collapse. She made me whole." The next night, they walked into the charity gala, hand in hand. The room stilled as Lena entered in the gown Julian had chosen, not because it was expensive, but because when she looked in the mirror, she whispered, "I almost didn't recognize myself." And he had replied, "Funny, I've never seen you more clearly." When a reporter asked, "Is this your girlfriend or your employee?" Julian didn't hesitate. "This is the woman who taught me how to feel." Then he kissed her. Not for the cameras, not to prove anything, just because. He needed her lips more than air. Under the soft hum of music, she stumbled in her heels. But in his arms, she moved like she'd always belonged. "You looked at me like I was just a man," he whispered into her ear. "Not a title, not a wallet, not a game." She pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. "That's all I ever saw, a man waiting to be seen." As they left the gala, he wrapped his jacket around her shoulders, her hand laced tightly in his. The city sparkled behind them, but none of it mattered. She was all he needed. In the quiet of the car, she leaned against his chest and asked, "What happens now?" He held her close, a soft smile tugging at his lips. "We live, not as a billionaire and a janitor, just two people who found something real in a world that fakes everything." After the gala, where every camera captured their truth, the city no longer felt like theirs. So they left it behind. They left the city that autumn when the trees began to turn and the wind smelled like something new. No press release, no grand announcement. Julian and Lena simply disappeared from the skyline. The house they chose sat in the suburbs beside a small lake fringed with willow trees. Not big, not grand, but the kitchen filled with morning sunlight and birds sang on the porch rails. Lena said, "I don't need anything more." Julian smiled and kissed her forehead. "Neither do I." They brought Lena's mother to live with them. She didn't speak much, but the worry in her eyes had softened after years of carrying too much. Some mornings, Lena sat with her, knitting quietly, while Julian made breakfast in the kitchen, like it was always meant to be his place. No more meetings, no more reports, just long, gentle days where Lena grew vegetables out back, and Julian learned how to paint the fence without smudging it. Every evening, they sat on the porch together, eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for the sun to fall. And then, one storybook evening, when the sunset painted the sky in gold, Julian sat beside Lena, his shoulder resting gently against hers. They didn't speak, just the quiet between two people who'd learned to love without words. Suddenly, he turned to her, pulling out a worn velvet box from his pocket. "I spent my whole life trying to win, but with you, I learned how to surrender, and I've never been happier." Lena looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. "You gave me a world I didn't know I was missing." He opened the box. The ring was simple, not flashy, but full of meaning. "Lena Hart, will you marry me?" She didn't speak. Her breath caught, her lips trembled, and then, like something sacred, she nodded, tearfully. Then she wrapped her arms around him, as if holding the answer she'd never dared to hope for. The wedding took place beneath white blossoms in their backyard. No grand dress, no orchestra, just a few close friends, her mother, and the wind whispering through the trees. Julian wore a white shirt, his hair tousled by the breeze. Lena wore a linen dress she'd sewn by hand, wildflowers tucked in her hair. When they said their vows, no one cried, but everyone felt something profound. Quiet, unshakable love. "You choose me, not for what I have, but for who I am." "I do," she answered, "because I loved you when you had nothing to prove." Julian smiled, and for the first time in his life, he feared losing nothing, because what mattered most had already chosen to stay. After the ceremony, they sat where they always did, same old wooden bench, same quiet view, but something had changed. They weren't two people looking for something in each other anymore. They had found it.